Call your commander. She said it so softly it almost got lost under the buzz of fluorescent lights and the scrape of chair legs. But every man in the room heard it. About 24 SEAL candidates sat in the briefing room, shoulders broad, eyes sharp, still riding the high of having survived a pipeline designed to break people. Gun oil and stale coffee hung in the air. Their T-shirts bore unit logos and inside jokes. Their faces wore the same expression. I've already proved myself. Who the hell is she? At the front of the room, the woman in jeans and a plain black field jacket did not look like someone who told SEALs what to do. She was maybe 5'6", wiry rather than imposing, dark hair scraped back in a no-nonsense knot. No uniform, no rank, no ribbons, just a government badge clipped to her belt and a slim folder stamped. Classified, special access required. Lieutenant Evan Hayes, front row, arms folded tight across his chest, let the disdain show on his face. You're telling me, he just said, loud enough for the whole room, that a contractor who's never run an op with us came here to teach us how to fight? A couple of guys snorted. Someone muttered, must have run a mean PowerPoint deployment. The woman didn't rise to it. She hadn't flinched when he threw the first jab. She didn't flinch now. She disregarded Hayes with level, flat, dark eyes. Call your commander, she repeated. Ask him if he wants this conversation to continue. From the rear corner, Master Chief Aaron Vale shifted his weight. 49, weathered as rusted steel, he'd seen more combat deployments than most of the room combined. His expression stayed neutral, but there was a small, warning tension in his jaw. Lieutenant, he said, voice gravelly, you might want to dial that back. Hayes didn't. Pride and exhaustion were a bad mix. With respect, Master Chief, he said, if Naval Special Warfare wanted us pushed through another crucible, they'd send a team guy. Not, his hand flicked out dismissive. The woman let him finish. Then she turned her head slightly toward the back of the room. Colonel Sutter, she said, you want to handle this? Or do I? Until that moment, most of the candidates hadn't noticed the Marine in the back row. The silver hair close-cropped to his skull, the Navy insignia on his chest, the small scar across his jaw. Colonel James Sutter, Joint Liaison, legend in certain circles, ghost in others. Now every set of eyes swung toward him. Sutter studied the woman for a heartbeat, then exhaled slowly, like he'd hoped this wouldn't be necessary. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a phone, and tapped a single contact. Put on speaker. The line barely rang once. Admiral Rhee, Sutter said. Sutter here. I'm at Little Creek for the Red Cell course. Just had some questions about a contractor you sent me. His eyes moved to the woman as he continued. Designation on your books reads Gray Widow. He didn't say it loud. He didn't have to. The name dropped into the room like a depth charge. Every candidate didn't know it, but a few did. Hayes did. You heard things in briefings if you were in the right place at the wrong time. A rumor in a compartmented thread update. A codename attached to a raid nobody would officially acknowledge. Gray Widow, likely responsible for, operates unilaterally in denied areas. Attribution unconfirmed. The woman at the front didn't react. She just watched their faces as the recognition rippled across them like a shockwave. On the phone, a dry voice answered, faint but audible. If Colonel Sutter is lucky enough to have Gray Widow on his base, the Admiral said, the question isn't whether she should be teaching your SEALs. The question is whether they're good enough to learn fast. Sutter ended the call. Silence crashed back into the room. He slid the phone away and finally addressed the class. Gentlemen, he said, this is Dr. Maya Rios. For the next 2 weeks, she owns your advanced threat evolution. You will listen, you will learn, or you will ring out. His gaze flicked to Hayes. And Lieutenant, you just got the answer to your question. Try not to choke on it. Hayes swallowed. Hard. The woman, Dr. Maya Rios, Gray Widow, whatever she was, turned back to the room, folder still unopened. Now that we've wasted 5 minutes, she said calmly, let's begin. The Naval Special Warfare Training Compound just outside Virginia Beach was quiet under the washed-out light of early morning. Down the road, the Atlantic rolled in cold and gray, indifferent to how many people had bled training on those beaches. Inside the windowless classroom, The air felt thick, antiseptic, and nervous. Rios stood at the front, the picture of stillness. No unnecessary movement, no fidgeting. She could have been carved there. The candidates were used to reading people, tells, micro-expressions, the tiny signs of weakness that got you killed in bad places. It didn't see much on her, just that her hands, when she rested them on the podium, were utterly steady. What they couldn't see, hidden under the collar of her jacket, was the thin, pale seam of scar tissue that began at the base of her skull and ran down between her shoulder blades. Or the second, smaller scar over her ribs, puckered and ugly, the kind that came from a close-range fragment that should have ended more than just a deployment. Her past didn't live on a chest full of ribbons. It was written in the quiet way she tracked the exits without seeming to look at them at all. Master Chief Vale stepped forward. "Listen up," he said. "Dr. Rios is here on direct tasking from Special Operations Command. She'll be running advanced adaptive threat for this block. Cognitive targeting, pattern inversion, unconventional adversary profiles. You will treat her as you treat any instructor." "Clear." "Yes, Master Chief," came the automatic answer. Most of them meant it. Hayes wasn't sure he did. 8 months earlier, he'd finished a deployment that had felt like a lifetime compressed into 6 months. He'd run kill-capture raids with live fire coming both ways. He'd watched men he respected bleed. He'd made hard calls on bad intel and lived with the results. He'd earned the right, he thought, to be skeptical of people who'd never had to drag a teammate with half a chest left to a bird under fire. Civilian PhD or not. Rios flipped open the folder, laying 3 photos face down on the table. She didn't put them up yet. She let the anticipation sit like a weight. "My job," she said, "is not to make you feel good about how good you are. My job is to make sure the first time you meet an enemy who can outthink you, it doesn't happen on a real objective." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried on its own. "I know some of you are wondering if that's possible," she added. "You've survived selections, crucibles, deployments. You think you've seen the top of the food chain." A small, humorless smile touched her mouth. "That's cute." A ripple of discomfort. A couple of tight jaws. Hayes raised his hand, once the immediate sting of the Admiral's comment wore off. "Ma'am," he said, keeping his tone as professional as he could, "we've all been downrange. We've seen complex enemy networks, irregular tactics. We've adapted. What exactly do you bring that Special Warfare Group doesn't already provide?" It wasn't as sharp as his first jab, but the challenge was still there. Rios watched him for a long, unblinking second. "That's a fair question, Lieutenant," she said. "But you're asking in the wrong environment." She closed the folder. "Master Chief," she said, "is the kill house still hot from last night's evolution?" Vale's brows lifted a fraction. "Configured for a 4-man clearance," he said. "Standard hostage rescue scenario." "Good." She turned back to Hayes. "You choose 3 teammates. Run it as you would on target. I'll run it solo. Same layout. Same rules. We compare time and hits. If I don't meet your team's performance, I resign this contract by lunchtime. If I do, you sit down, shut up, and see what you can learn. You didn't talk to a SEAL officer like that. Not here. Not in front of everyone." The room went dead quiet. Hayes felt his ears heat. "You want to turn this into a contest?" he asked. "No," she said. "I want to calibrate your assumptions. This is the fastest way." He glanced at Vale, expecting the Master Chief to shut it down. Vale just crossed his arms, expression unreadable. "Your call, Lieutenant," he said. "If you think this is a bad bet, don't take it." Hayes heard the trap and stepped in anyway. "Chun, Morales, Decker," he said, pointing. "You're with me." He told himself he wasn't doing it out of wounded pride. He told himself he was defending the integrity of the course. He knew he was lying. The kill house sat at the far edge of the compound, a concrete maze that smelled like cordite and sweat. Hinges and pop-up mechanisms creaked behind the walls. A bank of monitors in the control booth showed every angle to instructors and evaluators. Hayes' team went first. They were good. Of course they were. They'd all done this 100 times, in training and real world. They flowed through the structure in disciplined, economical movement. Callouts clipped and precise. First 2 threats dropped clean. No friendly cutouts hit. Hostage secured. Time. 2 minutes, 32 seconds. Exiting, breathing hard but satisfied, Hayes stripped his SIM magazine, cleared his weapon, and handed it to the safety officer. Solid run, Vale said, checking the digital scoring. Above the standard. Minimal overpenetration. Good work. He didn't sound like he was setting anyone up for humiliation. Rios stepped up to the line. She kept the same clothes. No armor. No helmet. She accepted the SIM rifle without comment, checked it with the same competent, unhurried motions, then rolled her shoulders once beneath her jacket. Any modifications to the scenario? She asked. No, Vale said. Exact same target matrix. Good, she said. Start it. The buzzer sounded. And then, for just over 90 seconds, the world narrowed to the sound of controlled movement. Rios didn't slice corners. She poured around them. Her steps were almost too soft to hear, her muzzle always where it needed to be just before a target appeared. First threat, 1 round through the upper chest. No wasted shots. She was already pivoting before the silhouette finished its limp rotation on the hinge. Second and third threat. Overlapping fields with civilian cutouts barely a foot off to either side. She took an off angle, knee brushing concrete, put single rounds into both hostile heads without so much as grazing a friendly cardboard shoulder. Some of the men watching had done sniper courses. They recognized what they were seeing. Not luck. Not adrenaline. Calculation. The last room held the hostage, the mannequin wired for motion, and the hardest shot. The hostile target almost perfectly obscured behind the hostage's body, a sliver of flesh, exposed in a gap that screamed no fire to anyone who wasn't absolutely certain. Hayes' team had handled it by splitting, creating a lane. Rios handled it differently. She hit the door, pivoted low, and snapped a shot at an angle that used the reflection in a wall mirror as a secondary reference. The SIM round punched through the hostiles' eye circle so perfectly that the red dust puffed backward in a neat halo. Time, 1 minute 49 seconds. 0 friendly hits. 0 misses. In the control room, nobody breathed until she walked back out into the sunlight. Rios cleared her rifle, checked the chamber, and passed it butt first to the safety NCO. Only then did she look at Hayes. You asked what I bring that you haven't already learned, she said. The answer is, I've run that evolution in buildings where the doors weren't plywood and the people inside shot back. In cities where there wasn't a QRF and exfil looked like, you make it out or you weren't there. She let that sit. Lesson 1, she added. Your experience defines the ceiling of what you think is possible. Not what is possible. There's a difference. No one laughed this time. Even Hayes could feel it. The sense that some invisible floor had dropped out beneath them, revealing another level they hadn't known existed. Master Chief Vale broke the silence. Back to the classroom, he said. We've got photos to look at. Maya Rios had not been born with a name people whispered in certain corridors. She'd been born in El Paso, the eldest daughter of a mechanic and an ICU nurse who both worked too many hours to pay for things like braces and textbooks. Her father had never been military, but half the men in their neighborhood had been. Rangers, recon Marines, a retired PJ who walked with a limp and taught the kids to treat tourniquets like religion. She grew up around stories told in coded half-sentences at barbecues. Words like Fallujah, Kandahar, Marja made the adults go quiet. They taught her to shoot cans off a fence post with a .22 when she was 11. She taught herself calculus at 14 because it felt like learning to read the invisible patterns that made the world move. At 18, her ASFOB score had recruiters salivating. They offered intel, cyber, a fast path to an office. She signed up as a medic. If someone was going to bleed, she wanted to be the person standing over them with a chance to do something about it. 4 years later, she was in a valley in northern Iraq that wasn't on most maps, holding a man's heart between her hands. Captain Elias Ward, 41, unofficial mentor, had taken 2 rounds through the plate carrier where the ballistic weave ended and bad luck began. One had ricocheted off a rib and turned his chest into a wet, collapsing cavity. There had been no cover, no easy way out, just packed dirt turned to mud by blood and irrigation water, the stutter of machine gun, fire chewing apart the walls around them. She'd cut him open with hands shaking so hard she'd bitten through her own lip to force them steady. The extraction bird had arrived too late. The surgeons later said she'd done everything correctly. Non-survivable trauma, they called it. He was gone the second that fragment nicked the ventricle. Maya heard something else. You weren't enough. The scar on the back of her neck came 6 months later. Different country, different valley. A convoy ambush that turned into a rolling firefight. A rocket round that turned the world white, then black, then nothing but pain and a high keening noise she didn't realize was her own. She woke up in Landstuhl with a surgeon telling her she was lucky. The shrapnel missed her spinal cord by 3 millimeters. Lucky. She spent the next year in rehab, learning to make numb fingers grip again, building new pathways over severed nerves. That was where they found her. Not they, as in a recruiter at a strip mall office. The other they, the ones who never gave a full job title. The ones who already knew more about her file than any nurse had access to. A woman in a slate gray suit sat beside her hospital bed and, without preamble, said, "We have a program. You match the profile." Interested, Maya laughed because she thought it was a joke. Then the woman started describing things that had happened in that valley in northern Iraq, details that had never made it into any written report. How long she kept compressions going. The angle she dragged warded to keep his airway clear and his chest wound above the level of the irrigation ditch. The exact words she'd whispered in his ear when she realized he could still hear her but couldn't talk. "We need people who don't quit when the smart move is to let go," the woman said quietly. "We need people who can wrap their minds around chaotic problems under fire and keep functioning." You did. You might again. The 18 months that followed disappeared into compartments and code words and NDAs that were more like oaths than contracts. When she came back out, Maya Rios existed on paper as a medically retired Army medic with a partial disability and a quiet contractor job doing threat modeling. That much was true. The rest of her life lived in blacked-out paragraphs and after-action reviews that no one in this classroom had the clearance to read. Back in the briefing room, the atmosphere had shifted. Rios slid the first photo from her folder onto the projector. Grainy satellite imagery of an inland city. Lines of red overlaid like veins. This was Mosul, she said. Late stage of the fight, when ISIS had learned enough about how we moved that they started modeling us better than we modeled them. First lesson, adaptive enemies don't stay impressed by your doctrine for long. She talked them through it. How the enemy had inverted their expectations, used their own timing patterns against them, baited and then rolled up units who assumed past behavior predicted future engagements. She didn't say where she'd been during that fight. Hayes listened despite himself. The numbers she put on the screen weren't emotionally charged. They were attrition rates, response times, decision cycles. The kind of brutal math he was used to seeing buried in annexes. But the way she talked about them made something itch in his brain. Like someone was reaching in and rearranging his mental flowcharts. She paused only once, pressing her fingers briefly against the base of her neck as if the skin there hurt. "Questions?" she asked. A petty officer in the back raised his hand. "Ma'am, are you saying the way we've been running direct action is wrong?" "I'm saying it's incomplete," Rios replied. "If you train to fight one kind of enemy, you're just training to die faster when you meet a smarter one. My job is to show you what those smarter ones might look like." Hayes opened his mouth, then closed it again. The words he wanted came from pride, not curiosity. He swallowed them, for the moment. The tension didn't vanish after the kill house. It evolved. Over the next 4 days, Rios put them through scenario after scenario that felt slightly wrong. Not wrong as in unsafe. Wrong as in tilted. Drone feeds that cut at critical moments. Comms that lagged by 6 seconds. Targets that moved against pattern. Every time, the team that tried to run the textbook answer got hung out to dry. Every time, Rios dissected the outcome without raising her voice. "This is where you assumed their leader would behave like you in his shoes," she'd say, circling something on the whiteboard. "This is where you bet on your own mythology instead of their reality." She wasn't cruel. She was merciless. By day 5, the resentment among the candidates had condensed into something almost tactile. Hayes participated. He answered when called on. But there was a coldness in him now, a slow-burning anger that had less to do with Rios personally and more to do with the idea that everything he'd suffered to learn might not be enough. On day 6, Master Chief Vale found Rios on the range, alone, cleaning a carbine that clearly didn't need it. "We've got an issue," he said. She didn't look up. "Lieutenant Hayes?" And a few others riding his wake. Vale rubbed a hand across his jaw. Hayes filed a formal concern with the training commander. "Says your methods are operationally unproven and divergent from established NSW doctrine. That's one way to describe things no one's written down where you can see them," Rios said. "Commander Price wants a real-world analog," Vale went on. "He suggested folding you into the gauntlet tomorrow. Full evolution. Same standards. Same constraints. The gauntlet. 48 hours of rucks, water insertions, forced marches, limited sleep, limited calories, simulated contact, casualty drags, the kind of evolution designed not just to break bodies, but to strip away everything a man used to prop up his ego and see what was left." Rios looked down at her hands, at the faint white tracery of scars across her knuckles. "I'm a contractor," she said. "I'm not required to play that game." "No," Vale agreed. "You're not. If you say no, I'll back you. But understand, if you don't, some of them will file you in the mental folder labeled theory only. They'll nod, take notes, then forget it the first time their adrenaline spikes." He didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't need to. Her fingers drifted unconsciously to the small brass token that hung under her shirt. Not a cross, not a saint. A flattened bullet jacket with EW scratched into the metal. "Elias Ward. This course is about teaching them to survive people like the ones who killed him," she said quietly. Vale's expression flickered, just for a second, like he'd guessed what the token was even if he didn't know the story. "I'll be on the beach at 03:30, Rios said. "Same loadout they carry. No exemptions." "Understood," Vale said. As he turned to go, he added, "For what it's worth, I've seen a lot of people talk a big game. You're not one of them." She snorted softly. "Don't start being nice to me, Master Chief. It'll ruin my image." They stepped off into the night at 0400. The Atlantic wind knifed through uniforms and jackets, carrying the smell of salt and something metallic. Under red-filtered headlamps, the sand looked almost black. 65 pounds dry weight, Vale barked, pacing the line of rucks. "No shaving ounces. You'll move fast enough that you can't think about how much it sucks, but not so fast you blow out your knees in the first 6 miles." He stopped in front of Rios. "Same for you, Doc," he said. You tap out. Nobody's writing you up." She tightened the straps until the rucks settled against her spine like a familiar enemy. "Copy," she said. They started south along the shoreline, toward the scattering of lights that marked the furthest checkpoint. Soft sand sucked at their boots. The weight became reality by the first mile, a suggestion of pain by the second, a fact by the fourth. The only sound were the whisper of waves and the huff of breath. Rios didn't try to be at the front. She slid into the first third of the formation and stayed there, pacing herself, finding that thin thread of efficiency she'd learned the hard way in places that had no medevacs. By mile 7, a petty officer's gait turned wrong, the slight hitch that meant trouble. A half-mile later, he stepped out and sat down hard, ripping off his pack and cursing softly. "Ring the bell," Vale said, his tone not unkind. "Doesn't mean you're a coward. It means your body's done. Live to fight another day." The man stared at the brass bell hanging from its stand, then hit it 3 times. Its hollow clang chased them down the beach. Mile after mile, the line thinned. Hayes kept himself near the front, jaw clenched, every muscle in his back trying to seize. He refused to slow down enough to find a sustainable rhythm. At mile 10, he passed Rios. She glanced at him, taking in his 2 wide eyes and the way his shoulders rode too high. "You keep that tempo," she said quietly. "You'll blow your calves before the second phase." "Focus on your own ruck, ma'am," he replied, the last word twisted. "As you wish," she said, and let him go. 3 hours later, in the pool building, he remembered that conversation while adjusting a pair of fins that suddenly felt like cinder blocks. The maritime phase was a 2-kilometer fin in full kit through dark, cold Atlantic water. Hypothermia was not a metaphor. They stepped into the surf as a line and broke apart into staggered pairs. The cold hit like a slap that kept going. Some guys gasped and choked, fighting the instinct to thrash. Training took over. Heads down, long strokes. Kick, breathe, kick. Rios settled into a form that looked almost lazy. No wasted movement. No ego. She made the water work around her instead of fighting it. Halfway through, she slipped past Hayes. His kick had lost its rhythm. The tremor in his legs said cramping. His breathing had a ragged edge. "You're burning too hot," she called, voice carrying oddly over the chop. "Dial it down, or you're going to lock up." He glared, salt water stinging his eyes. "I don't need coaching, ma'am." "Then don't lock up," she said and swam on. He didn't lock up, but only because part of his brain, the part not drowning in ego, listened and forced him to find a slower, smoother pace. By 24 hours in, time flattened. They moved through land NAV courses under the stars, breaking brush, plotting grid references with fingers that didn't want to grip. They ate cold rations without tasting them. They slept in 20-minute fragments on hard ground, brains never fully unclenching. Simulated contact came in the form of blank rounds and paintballs that stung like hornets. Opt for teams, real SEALs with mean streaks. Harass them from the tree line, force them to move, reorient, respond. During one particularly ugly contact in a narrow drainage ditch, Hayes started issuing commands that sounded decisive, but didn't actually solve the problem. Push left, he shouted, even though left was a 3-foot berm into an open field. Rios, pressed into the mud 10 feet away, could see how the op for fire was walking down the ditch, corralling them into that open patch. "This isn't working," she snapped. "Right bank now. Use the reeds for concealment and break perpendicular to their fire." "I've got this." Hayes shot back, angry even as rounds snapped overhead. "Not from where I'm sitting," she replied. "Move, or get rolled up." Chun and Morales didn't wait for Hayes's pride to catch up. They trusted what they saw in the terrain and moved right. When Opfer popped smoke and rushed the ditch, they found only a trail of footprints and a few empty shell casings. Later, in the debrief, Rios didn't say, "I told you so." She said, "Arrogance under pressure kills faster than bad luck." By hour 40, nobody had room left for pride. Just muscle memory, stubbornness, and small, private reasons for not ringing that bell. Hour 46, the casualty carry. A 180-pound dummy on a litter over rough ground for 8 kilometers. Every 10 minutes, the teams rotated bearers. It didn't make it easier. It just spread the suffering. On the second rotation, Hayes misjudged a step, his tired legs finally betraying him. His ankle rolled, and he went down hard, catching himself with his hands, barely missing getting trampled by the litter. "Lieutenant," someone barked, grabbing his pack to keep him from sliding down the embankment. "I'm fine," he panted, chest heaving. His vision had narrowed to a tunneling gray. His heart hammered so fast it felt arrhythmic. "Keep moving." "You're not fine," another voice said. "Rios." She crouched down, scanning his face, his skin tone, the way his hands shook despite the cool air. "Pulses racing, your sweat's salty, and not making sense," she said. "You're heading for heat exhaustion and electrolyte crash." He wanted to snarl at her, to tell her again to back off, to protect what little dignity he thought he had left. Instead, his body betrayed him. His hand trembled as he reached for his canteen and sloshed most of the water across his chest. Rios swore under her breath, tore open a small packet from a side pouch, and dumped its contents into his canteen. "Drink," she ordered. Slowly, he stared at her, chest still heaving. "You trying to win points, ma'am?" "I'm trying to keep the guy next to me from becoming a real casualty in a fake fight," she said. "You go down, everyone behind you pays for it. Drink." There was no contempt in it. No softness either. Just a flat statement of fact. He drank. The electrolytes hit his system like a hand grabbing him by the collar and hauling him back from an edge he hadn't realized he was standing on. They finished the carry. They finished the gauntlet. 15 men and 1 woman stumbled back onto the same strip of sand where they'd started, faces hollowed out, feet blistered, eyes red with exhaustion. Commander Price and Colonel Sutter waited for them. "You just met a very small slice of what we ask of people in this community," Price said. "Some of you met it with more grace than others. All of you finished. That matters." He turned to Rios. "Doctor," he said, "you kept up with a class of active team guys and candidates in a crucible that breaks people half your age. That's unusual for a contractor." Rios gave a thin smile. "I don't like that word," she said. "Contractor. What word do you like?" Sutter asked. She thought of a valley in the dark, a man dying in her hands, a bullet casing with his initials stamped into the brass. The code name someone had carved into her like an epitaph. "Useful," she said finally. "I like being useful." 8 hours, 2 showers, and about 3,000 calories later, they reconvened in the briefing room. Nobody slouched now. Movement hurt too much. Colonel Sutter stood at the front with Commander Price and Master Chief Vale. Rios sat off to one side, civilian jacket on, hair still damp at the ends. "Before we close this block," Price said, "we need to address an elephant in the room." His eyes went to Hayes. "Lieutenant, you submitted a formal concern about Dr. Rios's role and qualifications. We gave you a venue to test those concerns. You've had an opportunity to observe her under stress in the field. Do you still stand by that assessment?" Every face turned. Hayes rose slowly. His body hated him for it. He didn't look at Rios. "No, sir," he said, voice rough. "My assessment was based on incomplete information and personal bias. Her performance in the gauntlet and the shoot house demonstrated operational proficiency that meets or exceeds our standards. I withdraw my objections." Price nodded. "Thank you for the honesty," he said. "You're not the first operator to mistake unfamiliar for unqualified. If you're smart, you'll be one of the last." He lifted a thin folder. "I ran a deeper check on Dr. Rios's background," he said. "My clearance let me see more than most. Not all." He opened the folder. Most of the page inside was blacked out. "What I can tell you is this," he went on. "Between the time she left the Army as a wounded medic and the time she surfaced as a threat analyst, she spent just under 2 years in a program whose designation does not appear in any database you have access to." He looked at them over the top of the folder. "You've heard the code name," he said. "Gray Widow. Some of you thought she was a myth. A composite of different operators chalked up to one ghost. I can't discuss the operations attached to that name. I can tell you that some of the people in rooms none of you will ever see speak that code name with the same tone you use for men whose pictures hang on these walls." Silence. In the front row, Hayes's ears rang. He'd heard that name in a windowless SCF, attached to grainy imagery and bullet points that boiled down to: someone out there is doing things our enemies hate, and our allies won't admit they asked for. Now that someone sat 10 feet from him, hands folded calmly in her lap, Rios stood up. Rather than take the podium, she walked to the front row and turned to face them from there, close enough that they had to tilt their heads to look up at her. She reached under her collar and drew out the brass disc on its chain. It wasn't new. The metal was worn smooth where fingers had rubbed it over and over. The initials EW were scratched into one side. "This," she said quietly, "belonged to Captain Elias Ward. He died on a night when we thought our training and experience made us untouchable. We underestimated an enemy who'd changed faster than we had." Her gaze moved across their faces. "We assumed their skill ceiling matched our idea of them," she said. "We were wrong. He paid for it." She closed her fingers around the brass. "I joined the program Colonel Sutter can't talk about because I wasn't willing to let that be the end of the story," she continued. "They taught me ways of thinking about threat, adaptation, and human behavior that don't fit neatly into your doctrine binders. That's what I've been trying to give you for the last 2 weeks. Not cool war stories. A chance to survive the first time you meet somebody who sees you as a predictable system to exploit." She let out a slow breath. "You don't have to like me," she said. "You don't have to respect my background. But if you're as serious about bringing your people home as you say you are, you damn well better respect the lessons." Her voice had sharpened. Not loud, just honed. First lesson: the quietest person in the room might be the most dangerous. Second, if someone challenges your assumptions, You can treat that as an insult or an opportunity. Only one of those responses improves your odds of living through your next deployment. Her eyes met Hayes's for a beat too long. He stood again before she could look away. "Ma'am," he said. It felt strange, that word, without sarcasm. "I owe you an apology. I saw a contractor and decided that meant you couldn't possibly have anything to teach me. That was stupid and disrespectful. I'm sorry." He expected her to let him stew. Instead, she considered him for a moment and nodded once. "Apology accepted," she said. "Just make sure the next time you meet someone who doesn't fit your template, you remember this feeling. In our world, underestimating someone isn't just rude. It's lethal." She slipped the brass disc back under her shirt and stepped away. Colonel Sutter watched her, something almost like relief in his eyes. "Red cell block is complete," he said. "Most of you learned more than you realized. Some of you learned the most important thing of all." He smiled, but there was no humor in it. "That you don't know everything." 3 weeks later, Dr. Maya Rios's name appeared on a modest plaque in the training wing for exceptional contribution to advanced threat adaptation, naval special warfare. She hadn't asked for it. She didn't attend the little ceremony Vale held when he screwed it into the wall, next to commendations from operators whose stories had made it out of the classified world and into the half-public one. She was already gone. Hayes asked for a private sit-down before she left. They met in an empty classroom that still smelled faintly of dry erase markers and sweat. For a long moment, he just stood there, hands on the back of a chair. "I've been trying to wrap my head around something you said," he admitted finally, "about balancing confidence and humility. We don't get to go on target doubting ourselves. But if we believe our own hype too much, we get warred." The name felt strange in his mouth, like he was trespassing. Rios didn't bristle. She nodded. "Confidence is knowing you've trained hard and thought about the problem," she said. "Arrogance is believing that means the problem will cooperate." "And humility?" he asked. "Humility is staying curious," she said. "Walking into every new situation assuming the enemy has at least one advantage you haven't seen yet. It's the difference between 'I've seen this before' and 'what am I missing?'" He let that settle. "Will we see you again?" he asked. "In a classroom?" She shrugged. "Maybe. In a brief? Maybe. On an objective?" Her mouth quirked. "If I'm doing my job right, you'll never know." He laughed, surprised at himself. "Thank you," he said, "for not walking when I was being an ass. You could have said, 'Screw these guys,' and left." "I made a promise," she said simply. "To Ward." "Yes." He hesitated. What exactly was the promise? She thought of a hospital ceiling, the smell of disinfectant barely covering the smell of dried blood, of her hand closing around a scarred piece of brass, and a whisper no one else heard. "I promised I'd be better," she said softly, "and that I'd drag everyone I could along with me." She stuck out her hand. Hayes took it. Her grip was firm, dry, unshaking. "Good hunting, Lieutenant," she said. "Try not to give my enemies too many ideas," he replied. "No promises," she said. And for the first time since he'd met her, he saw something almost like warmth in her eyes. On a gray morning, when low cloud sat like a lid over the ocean, Maya Rios drove out of the base, past the gate where bored sentries checked IDs without really seeing anyone. She turned north, toward D.C., then west toward wherever the next brief had her name on it. Traffic thinned. The highway stretched flat and empty. She reached up, fingers finding the familiar weight under her collar. The brass disc was warm against her skin. Still paying it forward. "Elias," she murmured. Out there in some future city, some future alley or rooftop or stairwell, a SEAL would hesitate for half a second, remember a contractor with dark eyes and a scar he'd never seen, and choose the smarter option instead of the familiar one. Maybe that half second would keep him alive. Maybe it wouldn't. Maya had learned the hard way that you couldn't control outcomes. You could only control preparation. She could live with that. She pressed her foot slightly heavier on the gas, the hum of the engine steady, the road unrolling ahead like a classified file. Most of it blacked out, only the necessary parts visible. Somewhere, someone was making assumptions. She intended to be there when those assumptions broke.